This happened when I was really young. I'm talking second or third grade. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, but this memory stands out for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and it had been raining cats and dogs all day. After picking me up from school, my parents left the house for some upscale events. I can't remember if it was a fundraiser, or a dinner party, or something else entirely. Either way, they were supposed to come back home that night. But while they were gone, the storm picked up like crazy, and it became unsafe to drive long distances. So, instead of driving back home, they reluctantly decided to spend the night at one of their friends' houses who lived much closer to where the event was. I remember them calling me on the house phone, and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me there by myself, even though I insisted that I wasn't even hungry, and I'd be fine. My mom gave me a list of things to do before bed. Lock all the doors and windows. Keep at least one house light on. Make sure all the blinds were closed. Typical stuff. At the time I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to realize how important it was to not leave kids my age home alone. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the place to myself. It meant unlimited candy, and no bedtime. I obviously didn't have a TV or any kind of screen in my room, so I stayed downstairs in the living room, watching TV on the couch. I told myself I'd do all that stuff my mom had requested right before going to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway. But at some point later in the night, the sugar crash got to me, and I accidentally fell asleep. No surprise there. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, but it was late enough for the TV to have gone into sleep mode. So, 3 hours, minimum. I distinctly remember being much colder when I woke up. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I mean, temperatures drop at night, but the difference was significant, enough for me to instantly make the connection. Even at that young age, I thought about just curling back up and going back to sleep, but then I remembered the list my mom had given me. Even at that age, I knew she'd find out if I didn't do it, and I really didn't want to get in trouble after she trusted me to stay home alone, so I forced myself off the couch and went to check the windows and doors. I went around and did everything she asked. Locked the front and back doors. Closed all the blinds, checked the windows. Even the light, everything was shut tight, which confused me a little, because the house still felt way colder than it should have. I even put my hand against a couple of the windows to make sure they weren't cracked open or something, but they were all sealed. I figured maybe the storm knocked out the heater or something, and I didn't think much more about it. That explanation made sense to me at the time, and I was so tired that I couldn't devote more energy to thinking about the heat, so I headed upstairs to my room, ready to crawl into bed and forget about it. When I got to my room, I finally realized just how bad the storm had gotten. Our living room is tucked into the center of the house, so I hadn't really been able to appreciate the storm from down there. My childhood bedroom has a big external window though, so I could hear everything. The rain was slamming against the glass like it was trying to get in, and every minute or so there was a burst of lightning, followed by a deafening clash of thunder. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, but I do remember being concerned that a tree was gonna fall in the house. That's probably why I had trouble falling back asleep, even though I had been dead tired not even 20 minutes prior. As I was lying there trying to fall asleep, I started picking up on these odd sounds. Every so often there were these weird creaking sounds, like shifting wood thing is. The entire floor is carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first I thought it was a tree swaying in the wind, but the sound didn't quite fit. Even then I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms. This definitely wasn't one of them. It started bothering me after a while. For whatever reason, it wasn't the storm keeping me up. It was that stupid sound. I couldn't take it much longer. So I sat up and looked around the room, not really sure what I was looking for. I listened, trying to drown out the sounds of the storm and focus in on the creaking. Lightning flashed, illuminating the whole room. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn to the only wooden thing in the room, the closet. The room went dark again, and I sat there perfectly still. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, and my room was once again lit up. For just a split second, and in that split second, I saw something that made me choke. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before. I was 100% sure of it. Something had opened it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream, I didn't speak, I didn't even think. I just got out of bed as quietly as I could and walked out of the room. That walk from the bed to the door felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey. I immediately went downstairs, and hid under the dining room table. Then, and only then, I started crying. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away to help me. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, but at one point, I heard footsteps walking down the stairs. I held my breath, knowing that any sound I made could have ended my life. They weren't normal footsteps. It sounded like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs. The footsteps got closer. They were approaching the dining room table, like they knew where I was hiding. I can't tell you how scared I was. I really thought I was gonna die. And then from under the table, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, but two bare feet walked into view. Two nasty, wet and muddy legs that were tinted yellow. I couldn't tell if they were male or female legs. That's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over their legs, like they had rolled around in a thorn bush. They were also stumbling, like they were struggling to even stand upright. And just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, they dropped something. It was a wrench. It clattered against the floor. And I'm telling you, it took every fiber in my being to fight back a scream. If that person bent down to pick the wrench up, they'd definitely see me with wide eyes. I watched as that person stood still, not picking up the wrench, but not walking away either. I felt like a standoff, where any wrong move could end my life. Eventually they finally continued walking, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around my first floor, for what felt like an eternity. And then finally the front door opened and shut. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a long time. After that, part of it was fear, but another part of it was what I can only describe as trauma. I just remember being shaken and scared. I was at the ripe age, where I understood how dangerous the situation was, but not old enough to know how to deal with it. The rest of the night was kind of a blur. I picked the wrench up off the floor, not wanting my parents to find it. The next morning, after making sure the front door was locked, I slunk back upstairs, crawled into bed, and fell asleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, I was terrified to tell my parents. I didn't want them to find out. I hadn't locked the doors, and done everything they had asked me to do, so I just kept the whole thing to myself. It wasn't until several years later that I told them the story, and it actually took some convincing for them to believe me. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, since there was nothing that could have been done about it. So far removed from the incident. If I'm being frank, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. I slept with a nightlight from then on, and I developed a fear of the dark. That didn't go away for a long time. I still have trouble explaining what happened that night, but I learned my lesson. Lock your doors at night. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years. When I was a kid, I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring, half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying down in bed. Only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling, like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaks me out. I tried to float or swim towards my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half-lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings, taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing. A row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure, who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof. But I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair, and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window. And sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been. But there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the fourth time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away, if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped. But it didn't, not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window. Nothing even so. That didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind this was about 1 year and so I was having this dream, roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night. Not even close. But having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something. Which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream though, they just stopped for a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode. And at some point I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the backgrounds. The way childhood fears tend to. When life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it. But one random night I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream. That was scaring me. Twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes. Where I couldn't move. Complete another sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window. The entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed, no matter how much I tried. On top of that I felt significantly colder. As if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window. Yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function. The following morning, another couple of months went by, but I wasn't gonna be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream, in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared. Should I have it again to my surprise? That technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window. After waking up by the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents. Again, maybe it was the way I explained it. Or maybe it was because I was slightly older. But for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom. Like, there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine, not wanting to upset them. I didn't inquire further, but from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, My parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said, there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian, who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess, he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time, but something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me, and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me. A little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little, before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way. I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased. After talking to my parents, I had the dream only once, or maybe twice within the next year. But things took a very dark turn, sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit. And this time I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure. Something had just moved from right outside my window. And just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet, while my mom held me tightly. Eventually my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible, since they had moved, and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was gonna happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track. And I can't decide what's scarier, if it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him, for whatever reason, and who knows how, that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research, and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something, and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience, since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade. It was exactly what you'd expect. On the final day of middle school. Excitement and bittersweet goodbyes. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily over 1,000 students. So to keep things manageable, the teachers collected our yearbooks and passed them around to different classrooms, making sure everyone who wanted to got a chance to sign. I'm sure you could see how that could create problems. Anyone who wanted to could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. The teachers tried their best to prevent things from getting out of hand. But I knew a few kids who wrote some mean messages to people they didn't like at the end of the day. When I got my yearbook back, I flipped through the pages, eagerly reading all the goofy notes from my friends. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. There was a signature below the face of someone I had never seen before. His name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I'm gonna remember for as long as I live. The message he wrote was short, simple, and honestly a bit unsettling. It read, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, confused out of my mind. I'd never even spoken a single word to this Samuel kid. It wasn't like there was anything I could do about it, though the school year was over. So I couldn't see him even if I wanted to. I just chalked it up to some weird kid being weird. Or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours passed, and before I knew it, I was at home hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Kevin, David and Karen. The four of us ate Doritos and played Call of Duty all night. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so we didn't have to worry much about keeping the noise down. We were messing around on my dad's rowing machine, sometime just before 2, when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who the hell would knock on the storm door? It must have been someone who either didn't want to wake my parents up, or knew we were down there, or both. It didn't make sense. The person kept knocking in the same rhythmic pattern. I could tell Kieran was about to say something, and I couldn't stop him in time. In a loud and assertive voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to knock him out. He had basically broadcasted to whoever was out there that we were down there. My basement doesn't have any external windows, so it was unlikely that they had known we were down there. But now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice answered back. He said, "Come around to the back door," in a high-pitched voice that genuinely sounded cheerful, like he was a friend of ours, trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice too, and it didn't sound like someone who was pretending to raise their voice either. I was pretty scared, I can't lie. My friends were seemingly unfazed though, like they thought it was somehow exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted that I at least check it out, and even though I didn't want to, they pressured me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I approached the back door slowly, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass pane beside it, I could see a shadowy figure standing under the dim light. I got a little closer and his face came into view. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized who it was. It was him. It was that kid, Samuel Robinson III, who had signed my yearbook. My friends went to go open the door. God knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I explained to them what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Keep in mind, Sam was still standing outside while we were talking, and he could definitely see in at us. He must have noticed how freaked out I was, because he started motioning to the side of the house, like he wanted me to go over to the window. You might be wondering why none of us were taking the situation more seriously. I honestly think it was because it wasn't like some older, strange man was harassing us. It was a kid from our own school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went over to my kitchen window and cracked it open. Just a tiny bit. My friends followed me and stood a little off to the side. He walked over to the window, and I asked him what he wanted. Telling him I recognized him from our yearbook, he said, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself as Sam. Then he went on to say he always watched me from afar, and that we could have been good friends. I agreed with him just so that I wouldn't piss him off, but there was 0% chance I would have been friends with this kid, given any circumstances. I didn't want to press him right away, but I had to know. So I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't respond, and I didn't know what to say before I could de-escalate the situation. David called him a creepy stalker, and told him to piss off. Sam's smile disappeared. He tilted his head, like he didn't understand what David had just said. Then just as quickly, his expression twisted into something I can only describe as hatred. He went from passive and honestly kind of friendly to aggressive and angry. He started screaming things at me. How he hated my friends, and thought we should all die. How my ex hated me, and random stuff he had no right knowing. He reached toward the window, and tried to force it open. But I jammed it shut and locked it. He started snarling at the window, and banging on it like an animal. He was 2 seconds away from shattering it. I'm telling you, we must have caused quite the commotion. Because my parents came rushing down the stairs, demanding to know why we had woken them up. That's when Sam ran away. I told my parents what happened as quickly as I could, and my dad raced outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later, saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep. And they deal with the school the following morning, just to give the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning they contacted the school. That's when we learned the disturbing truth. Sam had been expelled a few weeks before the year finished, and he shouldn't have ever been at the school. On the last day, apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still included. That meant he had snuck into the school somehow, just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Despite working with the school to find out more, nobody could track Sam down. It was like he and his parents didn't exist. The whole thing was a pretty big deal. But the school did what they could to keep things under wraps. To this day, I still have no idea how he knew where I lived. That's what freaks me out the most. The running theory is that he was a mentally challenged and troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me, for whatever reason, and then he stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. It's something we don't talk about anymore, because it's just uncomfortable. But living in that same house has never felt the same, ever since.